Hello and welcome to another edition of The Conversation right here on News Central TV. I am Rita Omodia, and on this program we get to discuss political stories trending across the African continent. Now, on today's edition of The Conversation, we will be discussing the outcome of the ceremonious 111th anniversary of South Africa's ruling African National Congress and President Cyril Ramaphosa's speech highlighting how the party hopes to address South Africa's many challenges. We'll also turn our attention to West Africa in Benin Republic, where voters headed to polls on Sunday to vote new lawmakers. And for the first time in 4 years, opposition parties appeared on the ballot. Do stay with us. And right now, we begin in South Africa, where the ruling African National Congress Party marked its 111th anniversary on Sunday. Founded in 1912, the ANC is the oldest surviving party on the continent. Speaking at the party's annual January 8 celebration at the Dr Petrus Molemela Stadium in Bloemfontein, President Ramaphosa, who also serves as the president of the ANC, announced that its priorities for 2023 are party renewal, economic recovery and basic service delivery. Ramaphosa acknowledged that the party had failed in some of its transformation efforts, but pledged to improve the implementation of its agenda. While noting the various socioeconomic challenges facing South Africans, such as unemployment, rising costs of living, and an unstable energy supply, Ramaphosa also reiterated the ANC's support for Black economic empowerment as a means of promoting opportunities for Black entrepreneurs. Now, joining us for this conversation, we have Sizwe Pamla, Spokesperson, Congress of South African Trade Unions. We also have Sifo Mantula, researcher, Thambo Mbeki, African School of Public and International Affairs, South Africa. Gentlemen, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Wonderful to have you here with us. And I'll begin with you, Sizwe. Now, we're looking at ANC and they celebrated their 111th anniversary. Kindly give us some of the main priorities of the ANC for 2023 as outlined by President Cyril Ramaphosa.
Well, the ANC's biggest challenge really is first to function as a unitary organization. For the last couple of years, the ANC has been distracted by infighting and the existing factions inside the organization. So the ANC's biggest challenge after this conference is really to function as a united organization. This is very important because if you function as a united organization, for example, on issues like the fight against crime, which is one of the priorities identified by the president, then you will be able to fight crime without people making accusations that you are using your positions in the political office and your access to judicial institutions to actually fight political battles. So a united ANC is an ANC that is likely to succeed in fighting against corruption.
Okay,
but also if...
Yeah, go on, please. Go on.
Yeah, but also if you look at South Africa's major challenge over the last couple of years, as you already pointed out, is the issue of unreliable energy supply. We call it load shedding in South Africa. So it's been one of the biggest challenges for the administration, not just this one, but the previous one as well. This is important because all of the plans that you are likely to put in place to resuscitate the economy will not work if you don't have a reliable energy supply. You cannot convince investors to come and invest in a country with no reliable electricity supply, but also you are unlikely to achieve any of your economic goals if you don't fix that problem. So this should be one of his major challenges and priorities going forward. And the issue of unemployment and economic stagnation is a big problem. We have something like 24 million people who are on social welfare. That is not sustainable. We need to make sure that this economy is able to absorb jobs. So that is a big problem for the president and the ANC. But also, if you look at the issue of economic stagnation, we are borrowing at an alarming rate. We have a debt that is plus or minus national debt of 5.8 trillion. And if we continue at this rate, we are really going to face a situation where we're going to default in the future. So these are some of the urgent priorities to ensure that you can absorb the unemployed, you resuscitate the economy, you fight corruption, and you fix electricity.
All right, thank you so much, Sizwe. You've highlighted so many things, and you emphasize on the fact that there needs to be a united organization, united ANC. Now, for the past, in the 2022, we saw lots of divisions in the ANC, especially a lot of people calling for the resignation of President Cyril Ramaphosa. And in December, we saw a re-election of him as the president of the ANC following the 111th anniversary. Now, with all the challenges that you've highlighted that President Ramaphosa will encounter in the ANC, what are the chances of President Cyril Ramaphosa, especially with the corruption allegations on the ANC? How is the party going to move forward from that?
Well, it's a big problem because when you are facing allegations, especially if you are in a position of power, it really starts to work on your legitimacy when you conduct business. Look, we trust our processes. We have allowed the democratic processes to unfold. So Parliament has done what it has done. So the report was ultimately rejected. As to whether there's going to be litigation going forward, that is really going to be the problem, because you cannot have a president who's being investigated by law enforcement agencies and who ultimately end up having to attend the court of law. We have seen that under President Jacob Zuma. It's not a helpful situation. But that will be his biggest challenge. But also, he doesn't have, even his administration, they don't have the luxury of time. The ANC and the entire tripartite alliance that we are part of, we have exactly 15 months to convince South Africans that this alliance and the African National Congress has the capacity to turn around the situation. If you look at 2004, South Africans gave the ANC a two-thirds majority. In 2024, the ANC will be lucky if it gets more than 50%. What it means is that in the next 15 months, if President Ramaphosa is distracted by his legal challenges, for example, if there are people who decide to litigate or some institution decides to call him over to a court of law, that will really be unfortunate, because in the next 15 months, he needs to start to make serious strides in many of the problems that face the country to convince South Africans that the ANC still deserves another chance to be going forward.
Okay, Sizwe, still looking at the plans for ANC and, of course, President Cyril Ramaphosa. Yesterday, we saw quite a lengthy speech from him, and he talked about coming against dissenting voices and the party coming together to bring South Africa together. Now, you talked about the socioeconomic challenges which ANC and the president will have to struggle through. I want to get the views of South Africans. How did they feel with President Ramaphosa's speech? Was it a sort of assurance to the people? What's the mood like so far?
Well, South Africans have heard all of the speeches. So South Africans are not really impressed by speeches anymore. It's a question of, can you support these speeches with your action? That is really what you feel on the ground. As a Federation of Workers, that is the message we have heard from our own members, not just now, but in the previous episodes where we have heard these very good speeches coming from the president. For an example, in the next couple of weeks, in early February, he's actually going to deliver a State of the Nation address. That is another speech that we will be monitoring as workers. But the reality is, we will only see the evidence of his commitment when the budget is being delivered in February. How the budget is shaped will really tell us that he's serious, him and his administration, to really sort of like implement a developmental model that is going to extract this country from economic stagnation. Because if you do not put resources behind your commitments, then all of what you say sounds hollow. So the speeches are fine. People only note the speeches really at this time. Only the budget speech will convince most people that this government is actually prepared to sort of like roll out a people-centered developmental framework that will be able to take the nation forward and fix many of its real problems.
Okay, I'm going to continue on that now, and I want you to provide more information on this official stance of the African National Congress on the black economic empowerment. That was one clear thing that Ramaphosa highlighted. And how does the party actually plan to use this policy to support South Africans?
Well, there's confusion on that front. And he's the one and his administration who actually created the confusion. Because black economic empowerment is actually legislated and is a policy of the African National Congress. But his administration, just before we went to the conference, actually made an announcement that state-owned companies don't have to actually consider issues like affirmative action and black economic empowerment as priority issues when it comes to doing business, which means that before, if you wanted to do business with the state, you needed to prove your credentials. You needed to show that you have women as part of your board, for example, or women in senior positions, that you are complying with affirmative action. You have actually given a percentage of your business to black people, especially to previously white-owned businesses. But taking a decision at a government level, because government is the biggest client, government is the one that spends a lot of money. So if you wake up one day and then you say to companies, you don't necessarily have to look for partners who are compliant with broad-based economic empowerment policies. It means you are actually sabotaging the very same policy that publicly you promote. So that really did sound old, because most people on the ground have been saying that his own administration is starting to confuse. So we will continue to observe and monitor how this is going to be implemented. But the reality is there's very little by way of action that has been done, because what we have seen so far in the last 3 decades has not been black economic empowerment, but just the deracialization of economy by co-opting some of the black politically connected individuals into the white-owned businesses. And many people in rural areas and many people in townships are still not really feeling like part of this economy. The system that was designed in 1948 by Hendrik Verwoerd is very much intact. The report that came out that says South Africa is the most unequal country on the planet is really telling. It tells you that that system has not been dismantled. And black economic empowerment was supposed to be a government program that was meant to undo that system that was designed by others.
Okay, since you talk about this inequality, what do you think are some of the steps that the ANC would take to create a more inclusive society in South Africa?
Well, as soon as the ANC starts to appreciate that the system they are trying to dismantle was designed, it was not accidental, and that the levers of the state were actually used to design such a system, then the ANC will then use a state intervention, meaning use the very same levers of the state to actually intervene in the economy. For an example, in South Africa, we have one big challenge, access to funding. We have plus or minus top 6 banks in this country that dominate South Africa's economy. They hold about 70% of bank deposits. Now, that is a big problem, because firstly, they operate like cartels. They fix prices, they operate without really competing with each other. As a result, it means that they do not necessarily pay attention to small, medium enterprises. So small businesses or medium businesses do not get access to affordable funding. They end up going to loan sharks and other businesses that charges them exorbitant prices. That's why the level of entrepreneurship in South Africa is really not at a level of our counterparts around the world. It's because South Africans don't have access to reliable and cheap funding. So what we need to see happening is that we need to actually transform the financial sector. And in doing this, there is a good model that, as a labor federation, we've been studying. This is a German model. In Germany, they have something like 1,500 banks. And many of these banks are small banks. They are regional banks, they're non-for-profit banks. These are the kind of banks that actually pay attention to lending to small businesses and giving accessible finance. Because if you are going to grow any economy, you need to have entrepreneurship, you need to promote it, you need to give it all the support it needs. We still have also the issue of load shedding, like I've said. You cannot actually grow an economy and hope that businesses thrive if you don't have a reliable electricity supply. We import 90% of our fuel, and we have a very unreliable and fluctuation currency. So if you import 90% of your fuel, it means you don't protect those small businesses that are overly reliant on fuel for their businesses. So these are some of the bottlenecks that makes it impossible for small medium enterprises to thrive in South Africa. And at the same time, government has been given tax breaks and incentives to the private sector with no conditions. So what we have seen them, instead of investing that money back into the country, they take something like 85 billion rand out of the country every year to take savings and invest it outside of the country. Now, a country cannot function like a casino where people take their winnings and leave. A country has to spend on infrastructure. We need telecommunication infrastructure. We need energy supply. For us to get this kind of investment, it means...
Sizwe, can you hear me? All right.
This government has to explore imposition of businesses from putting their money into South Africa. Some level of capital control in South Africa is needed to stop South Africa bleeding money to it.
Okay, now, Sizwe, you mentioned the issue of electricity load shedding, which we're seeing quite rampant in South Africa. Now, with regards to this, we see the power utility company, Eskom, still facing lots of challenges. What do you think are some of the issues that need to be solved, especially with power utility in South Africa?
Look, with Eskom, what we really need to do, firstly, is to find out what has gone wrong. There's a lot of corruption in Eskom. People have been resisting. We've called for a forensic audit. Before you can even come out with a solution, you have to find out what is it that you're supposed to be solving. Most people who walk in there have got no clue what they are trying to solve. As soon as they take over the reins, you start to hear them talking like they are overwhelmed by the amount of corruption that has taken place. Eskom as a power utility has really been mismanaged to the ground. So we do need a forensic audit to actually look at what kind of transactions have taken place and who is responsible for the mess, so that we can actually recover some of the monies that have been looted and spent from the power utility. But as a matter of agency, we also do need to actually invest. The government did make a commitment to take 50% of Eskom debt, put it under national debt. That is important, and it needs to be implemented as soon as possible, because Eskom needs to revive its ailing and aging infrastructure. For that to happen, it means that government has to take, Eskom has to take a lot of money that it generates and invest it in debt service costs. So if government relieves Eskom of that burden of spending a lot of its money on debt service costs, it means Eskom will have resources to invest in infrastructure. So that is a solution that we hope will be implemented going forward, that commitment. If it becomes a reality, hopefully Eskom will have enough resources to invest in electricity generation. But the reality is people who take over the power utility don't actually understand what are the big problems. So we still need a forensic investigation to just find out what has gone wrong and who has been doing what and where is the money been going. Because at the rate things are going, they've just applied for a 30% tariff hike. At the same time, they are implementing a load shedding. So it's not a sustainable situation.
Okay, Sizwe, you talk about corruption in the electricity sector. We also look at corruption in the ANC, which has been in power since for a very long time in South Africa. I mean, they're celebrating their 111th anniversary. Now, even from the past president, Jacob Zuma, we see corruption allegations. Cyril Ramaphosa, still corruption allegations. Now, did ANC outline any methods to bring about transparency to encourage or, allay the fears of the people on the issue of corruption as they celebrate their 111th anniversary?
But there's nothing extraordinary that we have not had before. We have had these kinds of commitments. Like I said, a budget is the one that will really give us a sense of how committed they are when it comes to fighting corruption. Because what we need is resources. We need all the law enforcement agencies to be well resourced. We have the National Prosecuting Authority that needs to be given enough resources to prosecute all of the crimes and investigate some of the allegations. We have the Hawks, which is a specialized investigation unit. We have the SIU, we have the Asset Forfeiture Unit, we have the South African Police Service. All of these law enforcement agencies, they need to be well resourced. If the upcoming budget does allocate substantial resources for these entities to be able to investigate these crimes, then it will be decided that the ANC and its government, they are really committed to fighting crime. Because when you impose budget cuts on an institution that is supposed to investigate, what you do is that you overwhelm that institution. As a result, instead of investigating the cases, either they do a short work of doing an investigation, or because some of these cases are sophisticated crimes, they are commercial crimes, so they need sophisticated techniques and individuals. For you to do that, you need resources. So if you don't have the resources, then it means you are actually not committed. It's really the allocation of resources that will give us a sense of how committed this country is.
Sizwe, we talk about corruption, we talk about how well that the ANC has gone. Now, one of the major issues which you clearly highlighted, you talked about inequality in South African labour market. Now, high unemployment is also another problem that South Africa faces, unfortunately. Now, was there any plans by the ANC to deal with this issue of high unemployment in South Africa? And also looking at the opposition parties, I mean, how strong are they? We see 2024 along the horizon. Are there any chances of a very strong opposition for this election?
There isn't much when it comes to really absorbing the unemployed, because government actually still believes that the private sector is the one that's going to absorb the unemployed. The problem with South African private sector, it is really intertwined with the global capital. As a result, what they do is that they are mechanizing and automating. And so instead of absorbing the unemployed, they're actually replacing the existing workers by deploying machines. So you see, one of the most successful sectors in South Africa is the auto sector. South Africa is one of the leading countries when it comes to the manufacturing of cars. Just about all of the models you can think of are manufactured in South Africa. But the problem that we face in that sector, for example, is that there is a competition amongst these manufacturers, from VW to Ford and other companies. They are competing with each other when it comes to automation and mechanization. So instead of them absorbing the unemployed, they're actually retrenching the people that are currently unemployed and replacing them with robotics and machines. So that is the problem that we have. And government is giving tax cuts without actually saying, look, we are giving you these incentives with the understanding that you are going to have a managed transition. No one is saying that companies should not be allowed to embrace new technology. But the recklessness that we see from the private sector and the indifference we see from government, it gives you a sense that the issue of unemployment is not going to be solved. One of the most reliable backbones of this economy is the mining sector. For decades, mining sector has been the backbone of South African economy. In 2017, during the mining indaba in Cape Town, the mining barons there met and said they've 100 million workers. By 2030, they predict to be left with 95,000. So they are open about it. They're literally saying, we are working towards replacing workers with machines. So the issue of unemployment in South Africa is something that needs drastic government leadership and government action. So the legal we have heard from government is really not convincing. There is no coherent and solid plan in place that convinces us that this government actually does have a plan to absorb the unemployed.
And what about the opposition? Because I asked that earlier. You talk about the high unemployment rate. You said the government is not making any move to deal with these issues. What about the opposition in South Africa? I mean, what exactly is their take? Do they have high chances for the 2024 elections?
Well, look, the opposition is all over the place in South Africa, and South African opposition is very ideological, which means people really are, they hold on to their economic and political philosophies, and they are very stringent. For example, the second biggest political party, which is the Democratic Alliance, they have really spectacularly failed to play the role of being an opposition, despite all the ANC's failures. In fact, where they run municipalities and where they run one of the biggest provinces in the Western Cape, you can see that it is an opposition whose sole motivation is to protect the inherited privileges of white people. So it has alienated many of the young and up-and-coming black leaders who actually joined, but were optimistic enough to believe that this organization is a party of the future. Many of them have since left in disgust because of the racism that still exists, and really the focus on protecting the inherited privileges of the white minority. So, and the Economic Freedom Fund, which is almost more than a decade old, it was formed in 2025. So it is the third biggest political party. While it is very popular amongst the poor, it has also its own limitations in a sense that it does alienate many other people. If you are going to win elections, you cannot alienate the middle class, for example. You cannot only be a 100% black party. So they themselves are also experiencing internal difficulties as a growing political party. So in some provinces, they've grown over the last local government, but you have also seen stagnation in some provinces. So in municipalities where they have formed a coalition, where they have replaced the ANC and formed coalitions, those coalitions are very unstable. And as a result, the South Africans who have been watching this do not have enough confidence that these people can be entrusted with the responsibility of running the entire country. So, as things stand, the ANC still does have a chance if it were to embark on a project of process of self-renewal and focus on a people-centered developmental framework that helps the people improve service delivery, fight corruption, and grow the economy. The people of South Africa will still give the ANC a chance. As things stand, if the ANC in the next 15 months fails to convince South Africans, there's a very real chance that we will have a coalition government after the elections.
All right, thank you very much, Sizwe. You've clearly highlighted it there. If the ANC can put things in order, the socio-economic development in South Africa, and they still have a chance. But if they do not, well, we wait to see what 2024 holds in South Africa. Thank you so much for sharing so much of your views on the progress of South Africa. Thank you so much.
Thank you.